Hey, quick question. Have you felt like your money is shrinking, even though the number in your bank account looks the same? A few years ago, you could walk into a grocery store with $50 and walk out with bags full of food. Now, the same $50 barely fills half the cart. Rent is higher, fuel is higher, coffee is higher. Even fast food feels like fine dining prices. And it's not just one country, it feels global. Whether you're in the US, Europe, Africa, or Asia, people are saying the same thing. Why is everything suddenly so expensive? Are companies secretly teaming up? Is the government printing money like crazy? Is this temporary? Or is this the new normal? The word you keep hearing is inflation. But here's the thing. Most people use the word without fully understanding what it really means. They just know it hurts. In this video, we're going to break it down clearly and logically. What inflation actually is, why it happens, why it feels worse now, who benefits from it, who suffers from it, and most importantly, what you can do about it. By the end of this video, you won't just complain about prices, you'll understand the system behind them. Let's start simple. What is inflation? Inflation is the gradual increase in the general price of goods and services over time. That's the textbook definition. But what does that actually mean? It means your money loses purchasing power. Purchasing power is simply how much your money can buy. If today $10 buys you 2 meals, but next year $10 only buys you 1 meal, inflation happened. Your money didn't change, the value of it did. Think of money like a ticket. The ticket itself doesn't change, but what the ticket allows you to access changes. Here's a simple example. In the early 2000s, you could buy a movie ticket for around $5 in many places. Today, in many cities, that same ticket costs $12 or more. The movie experience might not have improved much, but the price doubled. That's inflation. Now here's something important. Inflation doesn't mean one product got expensive. It means prices overall are rising. If only tomatoes become expensive because of a bad harvest, that's a supply issue. But if food, rent, transportation, healthcare, and services all rise together, that's inflation. So inflation is not random, it's systemic. But here's where people get confused. They think inflation means companies are greedy. Are companies greedy sometimes? Of course. But inflation is bigger than individual greed. It's an economic force. And inflation is not new. It has existed for centuries. Even during the Roman Empire, when emperors reduced the silver content in coins to create more coins, prices rose because each coin had less value. The money supply increased. Value dropped. Same concept, different century. Now here's the deeper truth. A small amount of inflation is normal. In fact, most central banks aim for about 2% inflation per year. Institutions like the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank don't want zero inflation. Why? Because a growing economy naturally creates mild inflation. If salaries increase, businesses expand, people spend more, and demand rises, prices tend to rise too. So inflation itself isn't the enemy. Uncontrolled inflation is. And that's what people are feeling now. So the next question is, why does inflation actually happen? Why does inflation happen? Inflation doesn't come from one single cause. It's usually a mix of forces working together. Let's break down the main drivers. First, demand-pull inflation. This happens when demand grows faster than supply. Imagine there are 100 smartphones available, and 100 people want one. The price stays stable. Now imagine 300 people want those same 100 phones. Suddenly, people compete. Sellers realize demand is high. Prices go up. Demand is pulling prices upward. This often happens during economic booms. When people have jobs, higher incomes, and confidence, they spend more. More spending increases demand. Prices rise. Second, cost-push inflation. This happens when production costs rise. Let's say fuel prices increase. Transportation becomes more expensive. Factories pay more for electricity. Raw materials become scarce. Businesses don't absorb those costs out of kindness. They pass them on to consumers. Higher costs push prices up. During global crises, like supply chain disruptions, this becomes very visible. Third, wage price spiral. This is a cycle. Prices rise, workers demand higher wages, businesses raise wages, businesses increase prices to maintain profit, prices rise again. It becomes a loop. Fourth, expansion of the money supply. This one is controversial, but extremely important. If a government or central bank increases the amount of money circulating in the economy without increasing the amount of goods and services, each unit of money becomes less valuable. Imagine there are 10 apples and $100 total in the economy. Each apple roughly equals $10. Now imagine the money supply doubles to $200, but there are still only 10 apples. Each apple now costs around $20. The apples didn't change, the money did. This happened dramatically in countries like Zimbabwe and Venezuela, where excessive money printing led to hyperinflation. In extreme historical cases, like Germany in the 1920s, people needed wheelbarrows of cash to buy bread. Now, are we in hyperinflation today? No, but many countries expanded their money supply significantly during crises, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Governments injected trillions into economies to prevent collapse. Short-term, that saved businesses and jobs. Long-term, it increased inflation pressure. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Inflation after major global shocks is not unusual. Pandemics, wars, supply chain disruptions, stimulus programs, all of these combine into one powerful inflationary force, and that's exactly what happened recently. So now, let's talk about how inflation is actually measured.
How is inflation measured? You often hear phrases like, inflation is at 6% this year. But what does that number actually represent? The most common tool used is called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. CPI measures the average change in prices over time for a basket of goods and services. This basket includes things like food, rent, transportation, healthcare, clothing, and entertainment. Statistical agencies track thousands of prices. In the United States, the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates CPI. In Europe, Eurostat does similar work. They compare the total cost of the basket this year versus last year. If the basket cost $100 last year and $106 this year, inflation is 6%. Simple math. But here's where perception differs from reality. Inflation is an average. If luxury goods stay the same price but food and rent increase sharply, the overall CPI might show moderate inflation, but people feel the pain because essentials became expensive. This is why inflation feels worse than the official number suggests, because inflation affects necessities more heavily sometimes. Also, everyone experiences inflation differently. If you're a student renting an apartment, rent inflation hits you hard. If you're retired and own your home, rent inflation might not affect you at all. Inflation is personal. And there's another twist. Sometimes inflation slows down, meaning prices are rising more slowly, but they don't go back down. If inflation drops from 8% to 3%, prices are still rising, just not as fast. People think lower inflation means cheaper prices. It doesn't. It means prices are increasing at a slower rate. That difference is crucial. Now let's address something important. Is inflation always bad? Is inflation bad? The honest answer? It depends on the level. Mild inflation, around 2%, is generally considered healthy. It encourages spending and investment. If you expect prices to slowly rise, you're more likely to buy today rather than delay purchases. That keeps businesses active and economies growing. But high inflation damages stability. When inflation becomes unpredictable, businesses struggle to plan, consumers lose confidence, savings lose value quickly. Then there's deflation, negative inflation. That's when prices fall consistently. It sounds good at first, cheaper goods, right? But deflation often signals economic weakness. If people expect prices to fall further, they delay spending. Businesses earn less revenue. They cut jobs, unemployment rises. During the Great Depression in the 1930s in the United States, severe deflation contributed to economic collapse. Then there's hyperinflation. Hyperinflation destroys currencies. In extreme cases, monthly inflation exceeds 50%. Money becomes useless, savings vanish, trust in the financial system collapses. That's why central banks try to keep inflation stable, not zero, not extreme, but controlled. The real danger is instability. Stable inflation allows planning. Unstable inflation creates fear, and fear changes behavior. Now, let's look at how governments try to control inflation. How do governments control inflation? There are two main tools: monetary policy and fiscal policy. Monetary policy is controlled by central banks. Fiscal policy is controlled by governments. Let's start with central banks. Central banks adjust interest rates. If inflation is high, they raise interest rates. Higher interest rates make borrowing more expensive. When loans are expensive, businesses invest less and consumers spend less. Less spending reduces demand. Reduced demand slows price increases. When inflation is too low, central banks lower rates. Lower rates encourage borrowing and spending. That stimulates the economy. Another tool is controlling the money supply through open market operations. Central banks buy or sell government bonds. Buying bonds injects money into the system. Selling bonds removes money. It's a balancing act. Now, fiscal policy. Governments adjust taxes and spending. If the economy is overheating, governments may raise taxes or reduce spending to cool demand. If the economy is weak, they may lower taxes or increase spending. But here's the reality. Controlling inflation is complex. Policies take time to work. And sometimes political pressures delay necessary decisions. Inflation control is not instant. It's like steering a massive ship. Small adjustments take time to change direction. So if inflation rises today, policy effects might not be felt for months or even years. Now here's the most practical question. What can you do about inflation?
You can't control national policy, but you can control your strategy. First, understand this clearly. Cash loses value during inflation. If inflation is 5% and your savings account gives 1%, you are losing 4% in real purchasing power. That doesn't mean don't save. It means don't rely only on cash. Assets that historically protect against inflation include stocks, real estate, and sometimes commodities. For example, companies like Apple Inc. have historically grown revenues and profits over time. When businesses grow, stock prices tend to reflect that growth. Real estate often rises with inflation because replacement costs increase. Some people buy gold as a store of value. But here's the critical mindset shift. Inflation punishes savers and rewards asset owners. That's uncomfortable, but true. If you only store money, you slowly lose. If you own productive assets, you often gain. Also, investing in yourself matters. Skills that increase income faster than inflation protect you. If inflation is 6%, but your income rises 15%, you're ahead. The worst position is fixed income with no growth. That's where inflation hurts most. So the real protection strategy is grow income, own assets, avoid excessive debt with high interest, stay informed. Now let's wrap this up. Inflation is not a conspiracy. It's not random, and it's not new. It's a structural part of modern economies. Prices rise because demand shifts, costs increase, money supply expands, and human behavior reacts. Sometimes inflation is manageable, sometimes it's painful. Right now, many people feel squeezed because wages didn't rise as fast as prices. That's the real tension. But understanding inflation changes your position. Instead of asking, why is everything expensive, you start asking, how do I position myself in an inflationary system? Because inflation is not just an economic concept, it's a wealth transfer mechanism. Those who understand it adapt. Those who ignore it fall behind. Now you understand it. And in the next video, we can break down something equally important: what happens when inflation turns into deflation and why that can be even more dangerous. If this helped you see the system more clearly, subscribe, because understanding money is the first step to controlling your financial future.